Hello, everyone, and welcome back to FinCrime Insiders. This is episode 4. I'm your host, Skylar Palmer, and this afternoon I am joined by our special guest, Alex Roberto. As some of you may notice, I am without my partner, Lauren Schaefer. She is out on much-earned weekend away with her family, but she'll be back for our next episode. Nevertheless, this episode is going to be a great one. Today, we're going to be hearing from Alex some firsthand knowledge regarding current financial crimes compliance hiring trends, wage expectations, specific skill sets being sought after, and other similar topics relating to the profession. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone watching or listening that the views and opinions expressed on FinCrime Insiders are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of their past, current, or future employers. Any content provided by our webcast, hosts, or participants are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. And now that we have the housekeeping items been taken care of, let's get this episode started. How you doing today, Alex?
I'm doing great, Skylar. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Thank you again for agreeing to be a part of this project and volunteering some of your time. We're happy to have you on here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome, great. Well, I'm excited to hear all the insight you're about to offer us here. We'll go ahead and get going here. The first question is, can you give us a little bit of background in your financial crimes compliance profession, talent management, staffing, sourcing, things like that?
Yeah, sure. So I am actually a banker by trade. I spent 20 years in the banking industry, 10 years at two top 10 banks. And I really, my experience has spanned across sales, operations, and risk and compliance. So I've really touched all of these different areas of the business. So I try to bring a balanced perspective. Um, my specific financial crimes experience was towards the end of my 20 years. I led KYC operations in the commercial bank for Capital One, and in that role, I also had responsibility for risk reporting and quality control functions, and I worked very closely with our AML and financial crime stakeholders. So that's really the firsthand experience that I've had, over a couple of years. And now I've transitioned into the staffing and consulting business. MJ Boyd is a staffing firm that was established in 2009, and we really focus on meeting the staffing and consulting needs of our financial institution clients. So I bring, my experience in leadership and working across different business units to really focus on, the talent piece to connect the right talent with our clients to solve some of their most pressing problems.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Now, at Enjoy Boyd Consulting, what is exactly your position? What's that role consist of?
Yeah, so I lead our compliance staffing solutions practice. That means that I'm working with our financial services clients, everything from banks to fintechs, to help them with staff augmentation. So that is temporary contractors or temporary consultants that we bring in to help them, remediate audit issues or clear backlogs, that sort of thing. And then we also help them, when permanent roles come up where they're looking for a very precise skill set. From a talent perspective, we help connect them with those individuals as well.
Okay, awesome. And this specific staffing consulting firm, where do you normally source talent from?
So we source in many different ways, right? Over the years, we have gotten to know a lot of the people in the space. I would say about 80% of our business is financial crimes related. And as you know, it's somewhat of a small world. So we have a lot of relationships, with people that we've helped place over the years. And we also have an outstanding recruiting team, that they have a good understanding of financial crimes. They know the nuanced differences between skill sets in the AML arena, and so they're always building their pipeline of talent by having meetings and reviewing resumes and just building their pipeline through their daily activities.
Okay, awesome. Right on. Well, appreciate you giving us some insight as to your professional background and your history in this industry. We'll go ahead and move on here to question number two. Then, in terms of your current role, um, what kind of hiring trends are you, your team, or your institution, noticing? Is there any specific skill sets that anybody's looking for? Uh, is it not as hot of a industry? I know it kind of comes in cycles, so if you provide some insight into that.
Yeah, so I think financial crimes compliance is always going to be hot. I really can't recall a time since 9/11 where, we've seen less scrutiny or less focus from a regulatory perspective. Um, so I think the focus is always there, the need is always there. Um, we are at a time where I think there's greater importance placed on bridging the gap between compliance, subject matter expertise, and data and technical skills. So, obviously, if you go to a financial crimes conference, you're likely going to be hearing about AI and the solutions that are out there, but it's very difficult to implement those solutions if you don't have uh, people who are focused on effective data governance, data management, and ultimately improving data quality, right? So I think it's going to be very, very hot over the next couple of years. People who have that compliance, they have the AML know-how, they have the understanding. They're also bringing skills to the table that helps improve data quality, so that banks can make investments and take advantage of some of the solutions that are out there from a tech perspective.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. Specifically in my experiences, working with our data analyst counterparts, a lot of the time the folks in that department, they don't necessarily understand the anti-money laundering, BSA, transaction monitoring purposes. They see it in ones and zeros, right? Hypothetically speaking. So when you present them with what's being fed out on our end, the front end, the user interface, and we're like, look, I mean, in theory, that alert rule or those thresholds, made completely sense based off of the large sums of data that you guys analyze, right? But we're telling you, it's not actually as effective or as impactful as what we all thought it was going to be. So I think that kind of like you hinted towards is that bridging that gap of getting people that have the know-how of both. I know a lot of the leadership roles typically on the AML, BSA, financial crimes compliance side is requires some sort of knowledge of database programs, whether it's Tableau or SQL or Python, which is pretty old. There's newer programs out there now, but something like that. So it makes complete sense.
I think those are great points. I mean, anyone who is extracting and manipulating data for the purposes of giving insight to business leaders so that they can make effective decisions, it's very helpful if that person is able to pick up on an emerging trend or, a new typology that might be relevant to the business. It really helps them to be more effective, versus deliver a work product that might, maybe it misses the mark and there's feedback and kind of a back and forth, right, before the reporting is perfected. So I think that makes, yeah, what you're saying there is spot on.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We'll go ahead and roll on here. Question three, then. With the current economic climate, recession fears, high interest rates, there's been some pretty significant layoffs in the compliance sector. It's not necessarily the anti-money laundering, but it is largely in compliance as a whole. Um, there's actually been also greater than ever fines for lackluster compliance programs. So it's kind of contradicting in itself. But how do you think all of this correlates to the need or desire for institutions to take a proactive approach and bridge these gaps in their compliance programs.
Well, I mean, personally, I think you have to be proactive in this space because the risk is just too great, right? I mean, look at a company like Binance, for example, fined, in excess of $4 billion. Um, I mean, that's some significant, that's big bucks, right? And
Yeah.
that's going to have a real impact on the business. And so I think a proactive approach is absolutely essential. Um, I think the some of the uncertainty from an economic perspective has certainly driven reduced headcounts. So we've certainly seen that. If you look at some of the largest banks, um, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, investment banks like Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, through the end of last year, their headcounts were reduced by about 20,000. If you look at, to start this year, Citigroup, another top 10 institution announced reducing headcounts by 20,000. You also had, for the first time, I think, since the pandemic, you had 5 bank failures last year. If you add up the assets of those institutions, it's in excess of $500 billion. And I think those institutions had, somewhere between 18 and 20,000 people working for them. So those failures if you step back, it's almost like wiping out a top 10 bank, kind of overnight,
Yes.
right? So this is really significant. So I kind of see the market flooded with candidates who are in transition and affected, by this sort of activity. And I think the other impact that's not talked about enough, and this really worries me, in terms of the risk that this creates, a lot of the people who are left on the ship, they start to wear multiple hats, so I when I'm out and about talking to people in the industry, it's not uncommon for someone to share that they feel like they're doing 2 or 3 jobs, right? And so, I do think we have to worry. People are people, and at some point, productivity will suffer, quality will suffer, and we're going to be at greater risk for seeing some issues. So I think it's really important that leaders are not just looking at this from a bottom line perspective, and they recognize that there's got to be investment from a technology and people perspective, to make sure they stay ahead of the curve, and ultimately aren't caught up in some big, it's not good when you get that negative press for not meeting requirements, or
Yes.
and you get those big penalties, right? So
Yeah.
I think
Well,
that's what we see going on here.
yeah, definitely. I mean, and it's funny because at least anti-money laundering, um, transaction monitoring, where a lot of that data comes from, right? It's naturally retroactive, anyways, right? You're going, you're 30, 60 days behind the fold, anyhow. That's just the nature of the business. Um, so, kind of as you hinted, multiple people are now doing more than one of their jobs. It would definitely wasn't. It's probably still not what they were hired to do, right? They're, oh man, I thought I was just gonna triage some alerts, but now you're doing, investigations too, maybe even helping out with the other departments, whether it's KYC operations or uh, triaging OFAC alerts, just helping out wherever you can, right? Because they're cutting back. But as you hinted at, that typically the first thing to go is production, right? Because you're doing multiple responsibilities now, so maybe you're not meeting the production numbers that are required. And we all know that, in the industry, and if you don't know in the industry, that part of those regulatory requirements means that you have to meet specific deadlines, according to these different types of generated alerts or investigations, things like that. So that's when you get those backlogs, right? And that's where MJ Wood Consulting comes in and provides some contract, employees to come in and get that backlog back up to date, because that's the number one thing that the regulators are looking for is like, well, why haven't you triaged these 3,000 alerts? They go back to 2022. And then after that, once the production drops, then the quality soon after drops. It's just inherent. And then also it's because they're like, well, what are we doing? We're getting behind on all these mandatory, triages. So let's just check check the boxes that are required, and then forego any additional due diligence that may be required, in the interim. And it's just kind of cyclical, honestly. And I haven't been in the industry very long, but I do see that, it kind of just comes in waves where, there'll be uh, a little bit of a greater amount of layoffs or something similar, and then next thing you know, you see the same company 6 months to a year later doing mass hiring. And I'm just curious, that's got to have some sort of impact on that department as a whole. I mean, regardless of whether you're understaffed or you actually have enough staff, when you're just constantly going through that ringer.
Yeah, all excellent points. And I think in terms of the staff augmentation and staying on top of the stuff, not allowing cases to get backed up, it is a small price to pay, really, when you consider the risk and what could happen on the tail end of just neglecting that situation, right? Or asking people, another one is just asking people to work nights and weekends. We come across those types of scenarios too. So I think the key is working with someone who has expertise and specialization in that area. You certainly don't want to bring in people that don't have the right skill set to help, because generally you're probably not going to have the resources to provide oversight and train those people, right? So I think the key is to work with someone that has that understanding so that you can get the right skill sets in a way that meets your budget, right? So that way you have the flexibility and you have the value, and you're really avoiding those horrible problems that nobody wants to deal with down the road.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. On that note, before we head on to the next question here, I always say this, and I know not one institution will ever admit this or anything like that. People within institutions probably won't even admit it in positions that are privy to this. But I I'm under the impression that fines are kind of just part of the business, especially in those compliance areas. We look at say, for instance, a large institution, JP Morgan Chase or Wells Fargo. I mean, those are some institutions that have been fined the most, but look at how many assets they have, and there's specific references out there, whether it's Epstein or something like that, and it's like, well, we didn't know anything was going on there, but yet you have contradicting stories. I mean, I'm pretty sure FinCEN published one of the few SAR filings, or the DOJ did. I think the DOJ published some of those SAR filings regarding Jeffrey Epstein and his associates at JP Morgan Chase, and how somebody such as myself, an AML investigator, was filing these SARs. Somebody, whether it's FinCEN or another federal agency, had have looked at these at one point or another. It was pretty blatant and obvious, and they were continuously SAR filings. So it's kind of funny because you don't know the name of the person at the institution that's filing SARs, whatever, but they're kind of like a legend in our eyes, right? You're like, oh man, that's awesome that they were putting this out there. And it's funny because they were taking paragraphs specifically from the SAR narrative, and it was well written. I actually had taken some of those keywords, or kind of like phrases that you traditionally use for specific typologies, and I was like, I've never actually used that before, but now I'm going to use that one. It sounds like it's a good one.
Yeah, and I hopefully this isn't controversial, but I think any leader that makes a conscious decision that they know is going to lead to some sort of fine, just because they think that fine is going to be within, what's acceptable. I struggle with that immensely,
Yeah,
from a moral and ethical standpoint,
yeah,
right? So, but you're right. Unfortunately, that may be something something that's out there, something that's prevalent, but yeah, I think in terms of creating long-term value and doing the right thing, uh, probably not a good way to go.
Yeah, most definitely. But money moves the world, unfortunately. So that's where we're at. But I appreciate that insight there. There's a lot of moving parts going on today's day and age. And with that,
Indeed.
we're on to question 4 here. Uh, how are employee benefits packages faring? During today's economic climate, where and staffing needs. Are the wages commensurate to what they were? As you referenced, it's been a little over a year now since those bank collapses, March 2023, and people have been let go, laid off. Uh, Banks have been acquired, etc. There's been a lot of moving pieces. So just curious how these employee benefits packages are looking today.
Yeah, I think in many cases there's stability there, right? I think if you look back over a year or two, there are situations where offers for the same job might come in 10 to 15% less. And I do think that's a function of the supply demand dynamic, right? If you have someone who's not in a current role, there is some lost leverage in that situation, right? And so some of those offers might come in a little bit less. Um, I think the other trend, from a benefits perspective, people value benefits, of course, but work from home was kind of this, the thing that emerged post-pandemic, and there's quite a few people that value that. We see a very strong trend of coming back to office.
Yeah.
So I think most clients are, whether it's a temporary consulting project or, hiring people for permanent roles, I think more and more firms are looking for people to be in the office. If they were remote before, maybe they're going to, 3 or 4 days hybrid. And if they were hybrid before, they're looking for 5 days in the office. So that's what we see from our neck of the woods.
Yeah, yeah, right on. Yeah, I think I've noticed personally too. Some of these more recent job opportunities and postings. Most of them, if not all, are saying at minimum a hybrid schedule, but a lot of them are. It's full time in office. Um, Aside from the one-offs, I feel like a lot of the financial technology companies are still uh, floating on the side of work from home, work from flexibility, things like that. But I think as time goes on, um, I think they'll eventually get everybody back. Right, commercial real estate took a big hit as part of the past couple of years. So there's a lot of empty buildings that will probably get swooped up by some of these companies that are looking to expand and grow. Just their marketability and legitimacy. I don't know. Maybe possibly that plays a role into it. Yeah, we're out
Yeah.
of Austin, Texas. Right there off of whatever street the financial district's on. I can't think of it, but but yeah, that's awesome.
Maybe a thing. I mean, frequencies, right? That would be my take on that. So,
Yeah,
and of course, look, there are benefits to, to collaborating, being in person. I think certainly for people starting their career, I know I've benefited immensely by having some FaceTime with people, and you could just take in mentorship and information in a little bit of a different way. And I think you're also, there's better likelihood that you're kind of top of mind when it comes to opportunities and chances to increase responsibility. So
yeah,
not all
yeah.
bad there.
I'm a firm believer in that one too. I've worked remotely in this field and in person in this field, and I purposely went in person after working remote because I wanted to have more opportunities of getting that face time, meeting folks in the industry. Because typically, if it is like a remote job, it's pretty siloed, right? You're just communicate with your immediate team and maybe one of your leaders, and then there's maybe a monthly call where you get everybody from the department on there, but you're not like, hey, what's going on, Joe? In this Teams meeting or Zoom meeting where there's 100 people on it. So I completely agree with that one there. But on that note, I'm curious your perspective on maybe to do with these benefits packages, hourly wages, benefits may or may not be all that important anymore. I think the most recent thing that came out is that, especially currently with the rising interest rates, is that more people have began reducing, retirement 401k type uh, contributions, or just withdrawing it completely. And I feel like, um, in my age band, I feel like my immediate peers, I know more people than not that just search for a high hourly wage. I don't know if that's just, it sells to them. Like, I'm making $60 an hour, but I get 7 days PTO and I get no medical benefits. But hey, I'm young, I'm healthy, I don't need that, right? So, do you think that has played a role, and now employers are catering towards their workforce, right? Because that kind of seems to be a trend.
It's a good point. I mean, I think different people value different things, right? So, and you kind of see it depends on the employer. You'll see value in different areas across the board. Generally speaking, people want to be paid fairly, of course. I think what's kind of become baseline is 401k with some sort of match. Medical, dental, vision benefits that the very high end of that is companies are covering it completely. Sometimes we see that with foreign-based institutions that have operations in the US. And there's people that they might take a lower paying job in order to get those benefits because that's what's most important
Yeah.
to them and their family. Um, but yeah, I think it's just highly dependent. And believe it or not, some people will they will make sacrifices from pay and benefit perspective if they're getting into a culture where they feel like they've got some runway, there's growth opportunity, or they just feel like they're going to have some autonomy. A lot of people are just, if they've been in a kind of micromanaged environment or an environment where, they can't kind of speak freely or try to improve processes and this sort of thing. Some people are really turned off by that, and so they'll sacrifice pay or benefits to get into what they see as a healthier culture or environment.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense, and possibly, that's the easiest gateway for that is to work remotely, right? You're like, if I'm not in their immediate earshot distance, then I could have a little bit more autonomy. But I remember working remotely, and I feel like there was like a daily meeting. What are you working on? How's it going? Uh, and an end of the week type recap. This is how much you got done. This is where you should be at, or you're excelling, or you're behind. Stuff like that. So I think, like you said, it varies widely, especially on the employer, but on not only the employer, but just leadership in general. Because everybody can be a manager, but not everybody can be a leader, right? That's the saying. It's two separate segues.
That's for sure.
Yep, yep, awesome. All right, we'll roll on here to question 5 then. Um, in your experiences, both working in the industry and currently as working as a consultant for staffing and finding talent, can you offer tips for those looking to get into the industry, as well as tips that can help people that are already in the industry but are looking to maybe transition to a new employer or something, but they're able to maximize that benefits package offer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if you're not in the industry, and there might be two scenarios there. You could have someone who's not in the industry but working in banking, for example. Um, and I meet a lot of these folks. Hey, I want to get into financial crimes, or I want to get into a compliance role, but I don't, my current job really, maybe there's some parallels, but not a ton. I think the advice in that situation is you have to network to the best of your ability. It's important to muster the courage to reach out, to that leader or that hiring manager, and make sure that you're starting to build a relationship there. And that's not just asking for a job, right? Like, relationships are two-way streets. And so, there's got to be, you have to offer that value, and you have to offer that, it could be a perspective, it could be a certain skill set that you might bring to the table, but you have to start that process of communicating that and building the relationship. And then, hopefully you can move towards maybe a job shadowing opportunity, or, just maybe getting some insights in what you could do to put yourself on track, to get over into that area. And then I think the other scenario, there's a lot of college graduates that want to get into this field, but they don't have the experience. And in that case, I think for certain consulting or contracting assignments, if there's a very specific task that has to be performed in order to rectify an issue, I don't think it's bad for someone starting out to try to go for one of those assignments, because what happens there is, you're going to expand your network, you're going to meet people within that institution. You're probably going to get a sense if you really, do you really like this? Do you want to pursue it? So we have helped some people starting out in their careers just by aligning them with an assignment that, basically you have to follow the process, right?
Yeah.
Um, you don't need as much judgment or expertise to do the job. So I think that's another way to do it. And then, for other folks who are looking to grow, I think it's just awareness, right, of where we are. I mean, we've never seen such acceleration, in terms of technology and capabilities and the way threats are evolving. We've never seen it moving at this pace. And so awareness of what's happening is really, really important. So, if I were an analyst today, I would look 5 years ahead. I wouldn't really worry today because we need analysts. I mean, there's tons of opportunities and, issues where we need analysts. But if I'm looking 5 years ahead and I'd say, what if, AI, what if the robot is able to do my job? Analyze transactions, identify suspicious activity, write up a SARS, send it to FinCEN. What if that's automated and that's kind of the commonplace? Then you got to think about, well, what's really going to be needed? Um, it's a few different things, right? Subject matter expertise is still going to be needed. Whenever you hear either regulators or experts in the space, they're emphasizing the importance of explainability as it relates to AI, right? Someone is programming this thing. There's a specific logic or methodology that's being employed. Someone has to ensure that that's being done correctly and that it can be explained, right? So that's going to be relevant. Also, quality control, I think, is going to be a huge area. Someone's got to check the work. You can't just
Yes.
have the robot do it and say,
Yep.
"Oh, we're all good," right? So I think that's going to be important. And as those responsibilities shift, when I talk to regulators, my sense is that they're going to have higher expectations when it comes to risk assessments, right?
Yes.
They're going to expect to be more robust and deeper. And again, this is something that requires subject matter expertise. Governance is always, effective governance
Yep.
is always an issue. Um, and there's still going to be complex processes, right, that come together to do the work. So you're still going to need project managers and process managers to make sure that things are being done as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Yeah, yeah, of course. The risk and governance, quality control. I think that's all at the forefront as far as how institutions are moving forward. Because, like you said, many of these regulators, that's now a requirement for you to launch a new product. I mean, it's always been a nice to have, right? What kind of risk are we exposing ourselves? But like with the whole, novel activity supervision program, certain things are just a dead stop. Like it's got to be approved by your chief compliance officer, and before it gets approved by chief compliance officer, they want to see that risk management has signed off on it. the products team who's built out this new product that's now going to impact the institution, and the way that you monitor it has exhausted all resources to ensure that it's not going to be abused to the best ability. There's no such thing as no risk, right? Otherwise, none of us would have a job, uh, and the world would be fantastic, right? But
Yeah.
I think, and a lot of this came, after the recent, bank closures and economic collapses. Some say it's because of digital assets and things like that. But there's different varieties out there. There's just I always say money's never been moved the same. And the saying goes today, it's rapid. It's like there's more cross-border money movement than ever before. You can literally go online and you can search, how do I wire money to Guatemala? And you probably get 100 different responses from 52 different financial technology or just money service businesses. And those entities traditionally have a banking institution who is actually offering that settlement, right? It's going through an actual bank. It's not being done by that financial technology. Yeah, they have the night they have the nice and neat, landing page and user interface where you put in your login, or you put in the origin of funds and the beneficiary of funds. But on the back end, we all know it's actually that's just being sent to whatever banking institution they have that partnership with. And I think that's where we've seen a lot of these recent compliance failures, is that the institutions providing those services for these third party money service businesses or financial technology companies. I think there was just this sense of like, well, they're moving money, so they must be doing some sort of monitoring, compliance, KYC, stuff. But in all actuality, it turns out they weren't. And so the banks that were offering the solution were relying on the third party service provider who they were who they had these accounts for, and then vice versa. The third party service provider was like, well, they're a bank, they're familiar with this space. They have to have AML and things like that. So I think there was just a huge mix up there, and now we're seeing the repercussions from it all.
Yeah, and this is why I think it's so important to kind of be upbeat and have a positive outlook. That's all evolving very quickly, right? To your point. Um, but we don't want people being caught up in, oh my God, layoffs and economic uncertainty and all these things. Things are cyclical, right? Challenges are going to happen. But when you talk about everything you just said there is so much to address, so many gaps, so many risks to address, so much work that needs to be done, that I think, we should have a positive outlook here, and there's just going to be a lot of opportunity for everybody to grow and
Yeah.
contribute.
Yeah, like you said, awareness, right? Understand the needs of these institutions now. So if you are internally, and you're just triaging alerts, and you want to progress even further, you may want to get in tune with, some risk and governance, or like you said, quality control is probably an easy pathway to go there. Because as you said, and it's funny you mentioned the quality control. Somebody's going to make sure that the machine learning or the artificial intelligence uh, triaging is actually being effective, and it's not just saying, "Yep, this is all good" every single time. It's actually doing what it's programmed to do. But there's been some instances where I've been told that institutions have taken that approach where there's no longer even like an alert triage team. It's just being triaged by a program or database. So that I I like to say machine learning because there's actually, there's very little artificial intelligence in this world, but machine learning, some sort of program that's been developed. But those actually automatically disposition the system generated alerts, and then by the time it's being looked at, it's by an investigator. So maybe there's, that if there is an area in this field that may be possibly being replaced by these new technologies, it more than likely is going to be that initial alert triage process.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Real quick before we get to the conclusion here, curious your thoughts, perspective on uh, people moving jobs, right? A lot of people have a lot of different jobs, whether that's because of contract work is so prevalent now, right? So yeah, I worked at 5 different institutions in the last 3 years. It was 2 6-month contracts, and then three, year-long contracts. Um, how does that play a role into hiring, maybe for more long-term, permanent roles, right? Or should that be discredited? And like, best case scenario, it is contract work, right? Because that's a pretty simple explanation, right? I just work contracts, it's all I was able to get into, and XYZ reasons, right? But maybe it is actually multiple permanent roles that they just keep switching every 2 years.
Yeah, this is a really, I don't want to say it's a controversial topic, but I think hiring managers view it different ways, right? I mean, you certainly have some that could naturally, they might gravitate towards, oh gosh, is this person going to stay with me, right? If they've just been jumping roles, 5 years, 4 different roles, right? Something like that. I mean, it's certainly something that you have to consider, when you're making those moves. Now, on the flip side of that, sometimes that it's not within someone's control, right? Sometimes someone spends less time at a job due to factors that are outside of their control. And that's why, I'm a very big proponent of just be honest, right? Have your story ready to tell, be honest, be clear, and and I think that's how you can mitigate any issues related to missing out on opportunity, right? Because you're moving around. If you're going to be strategic about it, and if you're going to, try to plan it out, I feel like this is not tied to anything. This is really Alex's opinion. Um, being in a role 3 to 4 years, maybe 4 or 5 years is maybe a sweet spot. It gives you enough chance to build some traction within the company. And, I think it's enough to say, hey, this is someone who's not looking to leave right away. They're going to settle into something. They're going to do it to the best of their ability. And yeah, I could understand if they now want to look at a better opportunity, something that might increase their scope, or help them get more money, that sort of thing, right? So I think that might be the sweet spot where it's a
Yeah,
little more palatable. Um, but it's certainly, I can't say that it's not a risk, right? If you're moving every year or 2 years, it's just something to be mindful of, right? And the only way, the other thing there is you have to define what you're ultimately trying to do. That is very important. I know some great career consultants that's how they like the lifestyle that comes with consulting, even if it comes with some space between assignments, this sort of thing. And, they could go through a technical interview. You could establish that they know what they're talking about. They have great experience, but, this is their strategy and their career, right? And I think that's fine. Um, but I think I'd be cautious if I don't have a good, explanation for, hey, who am I? What am I ultimately trying to do? Because that people just want to work with people they trust, right? And
yeah,
that's going to be the best way to achieve that, I think.
yeah, yeah. Definitely agree. I think also, I think part of the flip side of those rapid movements of, different jobs, or same job but different institutions, is that, it kind of goes to say, maybe they don't necessarily deal with adversity very well. I think that's pretty common just in today's day and age. Is that, a lot of people now, because there's so many options out there. I mean, it's a great thing, but the moment that they're met with any adversity, instead of, sticking through it, maybe most of the time coming out better after you deal with that adversity, right? That's a big personal opinion of mine. Is that adversity is a positive thing. But now that there's so many options out there, I think that people are more likely now to just be like, "Yeah, I don't need this. I can go do this elsewhere for the same pay, same exact thing, and there it is." So But like you said, I think the story matters and how you spin it. And I think hiring managers should ideally be able to identify the truthful ones or the legitimate ones rather than the illegitimate ones where that maybe don't align with that company or that department's focus, as you said.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's well said.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, we'll go ahead and move on here to the conclusion. Um, I think we covered a lot of great topics today. You provided some good insight into what kind of the expectations are out there for clients, institutions, hiring managers, well, what they're looking for. Definitely, I think people need to focus on developing skills that are more focused towards bridging the gap of that data and the investigations type thing. That's something that I personally want to get on. I want to get more tuned up on those databases, SQL, Tableau, things like that, because I see those more times than not on those on those preferred requirements or qualifications. It's rarely on the specific like mandatory qualifications, unless of course it is a data focused role. But as far as these leaderships of these financial crimes compliance departments, they definitely are looking for those database skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And data is everything. I mean, being able to tell a story is very important. It's the way that you're going to build a business case to ultimately get your team the resources that they need to be successful. So I think it's important for everybody to be mindful of that. And a good story starts with facts and
Yes.
data, right? And if you can't get those insights, and if you can't present it in a way that's easy to understand, then it's going to be a challenge and it's going to be a struggle. So I think that's exactly right. Just some other thoughts I think that are important to get out there. It's great that you're doing this, Skylar. The conversation, having conversations and putting yourself out there, I think is really critical. I know when I was in the industry, it's one of my biggest regrets, really staying with tunnel vision and just focusing on what's in front of me.
Yeah.
I think you miss a lot of opportunities. So I do want to encourage people to get out there, get on a webinar, if it's possible to go to a conference,
Yes.
an industry conference, or if you have a local ACAMS chapter, it could really be anything. Just get out into the community and have the conversations, put yourself out there. I think posting, being LinkedIn is very, very important from a career perspective. That's how a lot of people are getting opportunities. So making connections there. If you're inclined to write an article or try to experiment in some way like that, that's a great way to build your brand. But
Yeah.
yeah, but you got to get out there, for sure. And then you'll see the opportunities. You have a better chance of connecting the dots
Yeah.
versus just saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm on this island," and
Yep.
you know now the
Exactly.
stress is building. No, get out there and get connected, see what's going on.
Yeah, and there's something out there that like you said, you may be exposed to just by talking to somebody else, and which is the intention behind this whole series is to get that knowledge out there from people in this industry. So to hear about it, because maybe all you've done is worked at a Chase Bank, doing alert monitoring or investigations for that matter. But usually large institutions, your investigations are very niche and siloed, right? Like you focus only on business email compromise or something like that. But if you go to a smaller or mid-size, institution, your investigations could vary dramatically, right, across the entire space. And that's maybe something you actually have been, eager to do, right? You're like, I'm tired of doing business email compromise. I've done enough of it. I want to go broaden my horizons. And so this little point of FinCrime Insiders is to get that knowledge and insight out there. Have industry professionals come in, and folks like yourself, staffing, talent, just people familiar with this space so we can talk about it, whether it's going to be technology people in the future, we'll get some data folks on here. I've had some preliminary conversations with folks that have their own uh, software products, things like that, that are great things because it's all proactive type products that actually eliminate fraud risk or something like that, right? To as minimal as you possibly can because it's giving you all the risk up front. But I jokingly told them that I'm like, man, currently that's not how institutions roll. They're just like, what's the risk? Okay, we'll worry about it, down the line. But as we've talked about in here, there's been a different focus by our regulators and folks to put that more up front. So I think some of these people are getting on track with these new products that are allowing you to get all that valuable data up front to actually try to cut off, those potential risks associated, especially in the fraud space. Like if an institution could get a report daily that says these are your account numbers that are being advertised on these dark websites or known scam sites, things like that, right? Then you could easily be like, okay, now we can put freezes on those accounts. We can notify the customers and get kind of a story behind it. Like, could you tell us, have you potentially had a breach in your network, which can also save your customers a lot of money down the line, right? If we're talking, email compromises or network compromises in general, which they could be very grateful for. So it works both ways there.
Yeah, absolutely. You made great points too about, I think thinking about if someone wants to think about like, where am I going? Where do I want to be? Big bank, small bank. That's a good way to be strategic. I mean, big banks are still looking for specialization,
Yeah.
right? Like you said, you have this very narrow focus. If that's your jam, that's great. Invest in that. Become the best expert that you could be. And, if you want to get into that bigger environment, then great, right? On the flip side, if you want to get into a smaller bank, then you're going to want to pursue being more well-rounded, right? And because you're going to probably have to wear those multiple hats and
Yes.
things like that. So
Yep.
yeah, that's great. Great
Uh,
comment.
yeah. A lot of great collaboration and LinkedIn actually, as we mentioned, it's a great resource, great tool for everybody. Both Alex and I have LinkedIn profiles. We implore you to come, reach out, connect with us in the space. Hopefully, we can help each other out. And of course, obviously, with me hosting FinCrime Insiders, if you are a financial crimes compliance professional, regardless of your title or role or responsibilities, we'd like for you to come on here and be spotlighted on FinCrime Insiders. Please reach out to us at our email, which will be listed in the description, but also it's fincrimeinsiders@gmail.com. You can visit our website as well, which is fincrimeinsiders.com. It'll just redirect you to our YouTube channel because that gives our most up-to-date videos, things like that. Our website does have our audio versions of these episodes in addition to. With that, Alex, I appreciate you for taking your time here. Super happy to get you on here and give us all this awesome insight into the industry. Hopefully, we'll be able to chat again in the future.
Thank you so much, Skylar. It was a pleasure. Appreciate you having me.